under Muammar al-Gaddafi tried. What did they do to him? They killed him. Burkina Faso, under Thomas Isidore Sankara, tried it. What did they do to him? They killed him. Ghana, under the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah, tried it. What did they do to him? Removed him from power. Tanzania, under Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, tried it. What did they do to him? They undermined his economy. Mozambique, under Samora Moises Machel, tried it. What did they do to him? They killed him.
Wait, it doesn't end there. What about Ruben Umniobe of Cameroon, Amilcar Cabral of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, Felix Moumier of Cameroon, Sylvanus Olympio of Togo, Hamani Diori of Niger, Laurent Désiré Kabila of DR Congo, Samuel Doe of Liberia, Eduardo Mondlane, Marion Ngouabi, Barthélemy Boganda, Pierre Mulele, and many others.
So whenever you tried to decolonize in all spheres, the former colonizer turned policeman of the world or policeman of the world will take you out.
Since the early days of the fight for independence and the independence era itself, dozens of African leaders have been assassinated by Western powers and colonialists. These leaders were targeted because they stood firm against colonial control, refusing to be mere puppets selling out their people, unlike many leaders today. They stood resolutely for the sovereignty of their nations. But what actions were these leaders taking that disrupted the plans of Western powers and prevented their exploitation of Africa? Moreover, how have these assassinations shaped the current state of the continent? Let's get to know. The first leader we will discuss is Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of Togo. Before Togo's independence in 1960, France aimed to thwart the aspirations for full emancipation and self-governance held by Olympio and the Togolese people. France demanded a staggering 800 million francs from the small West African colony, which had a population of just over 1.5 million and limited economic resources, as costs of France's colonial administration. As a trained economist, international businessman, and fervent Pan-Africanist, Olympio quickly saw through what he identified as the debt trap that threatened genuine independence. Over 2 years, he mobilized Togo's land and human resources diligently to raise the necessary funds to settle this debt with France. Despite paying this enormous sum and achieving nominal independence, General Charles de Gaulle, the French military officer and statesman who led France against Nazi Germany during World War II and later headed the provisional government of the French Republic to restore democracy, was not ready to relinquish control. De Gaulle held a firm belief that all French colonies remained the property of France, whether they were officially independent or not. This was completely contrary to what Olympio envisioned for Togo. His vision of a free, self-determined nation, free from Western influence and prioritizing its people above all else, did not sit well with Paris. The final blow was Olympio's decision to withdraw from the CFA franc currency, which France had forcefully imposed on its colonies in 1945. The CFA franc, one of 2 regional African currencies guaranteed by the French treasury, was a colonial tool France used to control its West and Central African colonies. Olympio aimed to establish Togo's own independent currency, backed by the country's resources. However, he never got the chance to realize this vision. Just 2 days before he was set to visit the Bank of France in Paris to finalize Togo's withdrawal from the CFA franc, France ordered his assassination. He was killed at the U.S. Embassy. Next, we have Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. Sankara rose to power through a military coup, similar to the way the current president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, took office. However, Sankara's coup was not the typical one seen in Western and Central Africa at the time. It was not orchestrated with the backing of Western powers like France, but was instead led by Sankara and like-minded members of the Burkina Faso army who wanted genuine freedom and sovereignty for their nation and people. Given these motivations, Sankara and his allies quickly landed on the imperialists' blacklist, with Sankara becoming a priority target as he began to implement his transformative ideas. In a speech to the UN General Assembly, Thomas Sankara reflected on the state of Burkina Faso when he assumed power, saying, "The diagnosis was clearly somber. The root of the disease was political. The treatment could only be political." And he didn't hold back on delivering that treatment. As soon as he took office, he dismantled traditional structures of power and inequality. No longer would politicians live lavishly at the expense of taxpayers. Sankara implemented salary cuts across the board, including his own. He replaced the fleet of Mercedes-Benzes used by high-ranking officials with affordable Renault 5 cars. Additionally, he nationalized the country's land and oil wealth. He once said, "Our revolution is not a public speaking tournament. Our revolution is not a battle of acceptable phrases. Our revolution is not simply for spouting slogans that are no more than signals used by manipulators trying to use them as catchwords, code words, and a foil for their display. Our revolution is and should continue to be the collective effort of revolutionaries to transform reality, to improve the concrete situation of the masses of our country." In just 4 years of leadership, Thomas Sankara oversaw remarkable transformations in health, education, and environmental initiatives. He launched mass vaccination campaigns at an unprecedented pace, immunizing over 2.5 million children against measles, yellow fever, and meningitis, leading to a drop in infant mortality rates. School attendance rates doubled, with more than 350 new schools constructed. To combat deforestation, Sankara organized the planting of millions of trees. He redistributed land to the poor and placed feminism at the core of his political ideology by improving educational access for girls and incorporating women into leadership roles. Additionally, he pulled Burkina Faso out of the IMF and ended its dependence on foreign aid. However, these radical reforms did not sit well with the French colonialists. With the assistance of Blaise Compaoré, a close friend of Sankara who later became president of Burkina Faso, the French orchestrated his assassination. On October 15, 1987, Thomas Sankara was murdered, along with 12 other men. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. With that said, let's get back to it. The third name on the list is Patrice Lumumba of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, whose assassination stands as one of the most infamous in African history. Once described as the most influential black man to set foot on the African continent by Malcolm X, Lumumba was a staunch Pan-Africanist. He firmly believed, "Without dignity, there is no liberty. Without justice, there is no dignity. And without independence, there are no free men." He also stated, "Political independence has no meaning if it is not accompanied by rapid economic and social development." Lumumba's political vision extended beyond the Congo, as he became deeply involved in the broader wave of African nationalism sweeping the continent at the time. In December 1958, Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah invited Lumumba to attend the All-African People's Conference, an anti-colonial gathering that brought together civic associations, unions, and other grassroots organizations. 2 years later, following widespread calls for a democratic election, the Congolese national movement led by Patrice Lumumba won the Congo's first parliamentary election. In 1960, Lumumba assumed office as the country's first elected prime minister. However, his progressive, populist proposals and strong opposition to the secession of Katanga province angered various foreign and local interests. Just days after independence, the Congo was plunged into chaos, as army mutinies prompted a Belgian military intervention. Amid rising tensions, Lumumba sought assistance from the United Nations, but the peacekeeping mission deployed did not align with the goals of the new Congolese government. Faced with this challenge, Lumumba made a fateful decision to seek aid from the Soviet Union. This sparked panic in London and Washington, where they feared the Soviets would gain a strategic foothold in Africa, much like they had in Cuba, and that Lumumba could become the African Fidel Castro. This was the final straw. In his 1960 Independence Day speech, Patrice Lumumba boldly declared, "We who suffered in our bodies and hearts from colonialist oppression, we say to you out loud, from now on, all that is over. We are going to show the world what the black man and woman can do when he works in freedom. And we are going to make the Congo the center of the sun's radiance for all of Africa. We are going to keep watch over the lands of our country so that they truly profit her children." The assassination of Lumumba was orchestrated through a collaboration involving the UK, the USA, Belgium, and Mobutu. Each played a role in the killing of one of Africa's most dynamic and visionary leaders. Next on the list is Reuben Umnyobe of Cameroon. In one of his speeches, he said, "If we fight to the death against an arbitrary integration of our country into the French colonial empire, it is because we want to remain the conquering defenders of the right of peoples to self-determination. We are thus in the service of Cameroon and Africa. We are the true craftsmen of international détente. As revolutionary nationalists, we are fighting to realize for Cameroon, and it alone, a true national independence with unification as a precondition, simultaneous or consecutive, but never excluded." Umnyobe was a dedicated freedom fighter and staunch anti-imperialist leader. In 1948, he founded the Union of the Peoples of Cameroon, UPC, a nationalist movement that faced harsh repression from the French authorities. In 1952, 1953, and 1954, Umnyobe traveled to New York to address the United Nations General Assembly. He passionately condemned French colonial rule in Cameroon and demanded the immediate reunification of French and British Cameroon. He called for a clear timeline for independence and the establishment of a Cameroonian legislative assembly. These demands infuriated the French colonial administration, which responded by persecuting UPC members in 1955. Many were arrested, killed, or forced into exile. Umnyobe led a non-violent resistance movement in the Cameroonian Equatorial Forest, similar to Gandhi's approach in India. He continued to advocate for independence and democratic elections. However, he was assassinated by the French army on September 13, 1958. Another leader is Muammar Gaddafi.
Why do you think they killed him? You think they killed him because he killed his people? Hell no! They killed him because, listen to me real good, you touched my nerve with that question. Did you know that in Libya, nobody's homeless? Listen, everybody in Libya has either a home or an apartment. They call it a flat. Did you know education in Libya is free from kindergarten through college? And did you know that if a Libyan wanted to come to America to be educated, the government in Libya paid for their education? Did you know that? I was there when he opened a $500 million hospital with 18 theaters for operation. I was there, and we went when he was making their own medicines. See, this was a man that gave free medical attention to all the citizens of Libya, and if Libya did not offer that kind of medical attention, they could fly anywhere in the world and get it, and the Libyan government would pay for it. Did you know that? No, you didn't. Did you know that from the oil money, every Libyan citizen got a stipend every year? And did you know that that man had no debt? Everything in his country was paid for. See? Now, when you got a man that did that for an African nation and was trying to do that for all Africa. How do you think Europe felt about that? Well, I was with Muammar Gaddafi when Gaddafi in 1999 advanced coming out of the OAU to the African Union with a vision of the United States of Africa. Muammar Gaddafi spent, listen to me, billions of dollars to create the African Union. Did you know that Gaddafi gave $300 million and the other African nations gave $100 million to put up a satellite so that we who call Africa don't have to go through Europe to get to Africa? And Europe was getting $500 million a year just by our telephone calls to the continent. Now we can call directly to Africa, and that $500 million is in the hand of African people. Did you know that Muammar Gaddafi was setting up an African development bank with $70 billion in the African Development Bank from Libyan oil money, that we would not have to borrow money from the IMF and the World Bank at these exorbitant rates?
So, what has the assassination of these anti-imperialist African leaders led to? You see, the West aimed to maintain control over these African nations even after independence. Once they succeeded in eliminating these leaders, their strategy became clear. This is what they did.
They recruit some from within your number. Chinua Achebe said in his book, Things Fall Apart, the white man was very clever. He came and cut the links and the things that kept us together, and he broke them, and things have fallen apart. And what they have now done, we have expelled them. But what I fear, our brothers whom they now work with, whom they have recruited, and who have our skin, speak our language, and are related to us, but they are working for them. The fifth columnists within our ranks, those are the most dangerous.
You see, they install puppets in power, often the very individuals used in assassinating anti-imperialist leaders, whether through coup d'etat or other means. You know what? The most dangerous aspect of these individuals, whom I call puppets, is that they are the worst among Africans. They are the most corrupt ones. They are the ones who don't care about the lives and living conditions of average Africans, opening the doors to imperialist exploitation of their country's resources. Sadly, these are the leaders who have held power across many African nations, caring only about their own pockets and status. When these puppets ascend to power, they form exclusive cabals or hierarchies that have ruled for decades. That's why, even in supposedly democratic systems, elections often amount to mere formalities in many African countries. The will of the people is dismissed, as elections are rigged before voters even head to the polls. If the manipulation isn't done through direct vote rigging, it's done by distorting the political system itself. In some nations, multiple parties contest elections, but a closer look often reveals that the candidates from each party are part of the same entrenched cabal. That's why, when discussing the prevalence of corrupt leaders in power across nearly all African nations today, we must trace this back to the historical activities of Western powers on the continent, which to some extent persist. They removed, or in the worst cases, killed, the leaders who could have established a positive foundation for the newly independent states, and then they installed evil ones who would bow to their demands and say, "Yes, sir," setting the stage for poor leadership for the next several decades. This was a meticulously planned and executed strategy by the colonialists. If that isn't the case, I can't imagine what else could explain it. because corruption and dishonest politicians exist in other parts of the world too. So why is it that only in Africa do the majority of those who gain power end up being the corrupt ones? With this, we've come to the end of the video. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments.